Ladies who have married into wealthy families, what's your experience? After a bout of unemployment, my husband and I finally have had jobs for over a year. My mother-in-law told us we should quit our jobs and go live in Italy for 6 months after I mentioned I'd like to go there someday. Also, it's really not that expensive. So that's the kind of personality I get to deal with. My mom is the same way. It comes from never having to budget or balance a checkbook. In reality, she probably has no idea what you would spend in Italy for a day, even if she just got back from there. My mom is definitely not wealthy, but I find that there is a generational disconnect from her, late boomer, and me, late Xer, early millennial. I think that people who worked in that generation don't grasp the PTO issues, environmental concerns, money issues, and other hurdles that we are collectively facing and or worrying about. She traveled all over Europe after college and was able to pay that off fairly quickly, but that's just not an option for me. I know it's because my job's PTO sucks, but it's also many other factors, and really well traveled people with means often don't see those disconnects. I stayed in a moderately fancy B&B for my 20th birthday back in 2010 with my boyfriend at the time. We'd been together a few years at that time and were talking about marriage. We ate breakfast with the other guests, an older couple who was wealthy and well traveled. We mentioned offhand during breakfast that we intended to get married, and they gushed on and on about how young people should travel before getting married, and that we ought to take many international trips over the next couple of years to see how we fared together and so we'd get to experience the world together. At the time, I was on a scholarship that required me to keep a 3.5 GPA and working an unpaid internship at a kids museum. He was delivering pizza full time so he could afford to go to community college night classes. It was immediately after the recession and both of our families were struggling. The night at the B&B was a very generous gift. Maybe they figured that since we were at that B&B we were part of their social class. But I remember smiling and being polite to the couple, but finding their comments and suggestions tone deaf and distasteful, even though they absolutely didn't mean them that way. They were just disconnected. Not necessarily. Traveling can be very cheap and most Europeans tend to backpack quite often when they are young. I grew up in a working class home and paid for my own college tuition. I still found time to travel and see the world. I turned down the ring. The family was lovely. He was lovely, but not for me. There were negative traits he gained through his upbringing that greatly disagreed with me, but they were not a reflection of the wealth or the family. His sisters and parents did not share those traits on a small scale. For example, if I asked him to clean the kitchen, I'd come home to all of the mess piled up but otherwise untouched, because that's what he did for the maids and genuinely thought that was what cleaning was. Coming from a very poor background, the first year was an adjustment in feeling and refined. Learning the forks is a classic example. I didn't realize how changed I was by the lifestyle until I left it and returned to my humble roots 6 years later. And though I realize I'm now a bit bougie in an embarrassing sense, there is a new refinement to my appearance and manner, paired with a confidence that really elevated my life. I'm able to navigate the world differently. It's as though that stability feeling hasn't left my bones in some way. Your third paragraph is so poignant and telling, and I've experienced it too. There are things I just can't avoid, having spent time around wealthy families. Some are great, but I hate that they are factors. Like having learned to play golf, which I can use in business settings. That comes up a lot in my professional field. It's literally leveled the playing field to be able to order properly at a nice restaurant, for example. And while my experience was with lovely, kind, giving people, if your roots differ that much, it'll always be something to work on, rather than worth with. In my experience, I'm really more of a spaghetti on paper plates on the porch kind of gal, and there's no getting around that. Even though I can blend into many settings, I was lucky that there was never that divide for me. Definitely never have been a spaghetti on a paper plate on the back porch sort of girl. Save up and have one nice piece of china to eat a low-rent charcuterie on in my best dress sort of girl. Aha. For me the divide lay in how little I wanted versus how much they needed to function. My one suitcase to my mother-in-law's 5 with an additional one for any shoes she'd buy along the way. A drastic example that nearly broke us up in year 4 was when my partner quit his job and was living off my minimum wage job, $1,600 a month. And he put his foot down in wanting to move from our $1,300 a month to a place that was over $3,000 a month. His mother had cut him off beyond emergencies, and he was filled with venom and confusion over why I couldn't move there. Just make more fucking money? I had eaten through my savings to keep us afloat, left him having emptied my retirement savings, and he just couldn't understand. The anger and tantrum was shocking. He'd never been like that before. His mother and I spoke about it, as she was rather sick of him too, and knew she had a role in it. And she said the biggest difference between her son and I was that I never had a safety net. I knew there was nothing between me and the ground, having been on my own since 15, whereas he couldn't wrap his head around the concept and the way it resolved. His mother gave us her penthouse apartment on the ocean, a place in town she rented just as her office, as well as a suite on the ground floor for $1,600 a month. He would go on to tell friends and colleagues, a politician, he was crashing in his mother's office. I was gobsmacked. But that's the reality. To him it literally was just his mother's office. That was his baseline. Wow, never been this broke lol. He would lecture me on what it was like to be poor all the time, telling stories about being so beyond poor that upon hearing the context later would make me ball my fists. I was so angry at the variance in our baseline and how oblivious he was to it. I don't feel that same shame you feel in your golfing scenario. What do you mean by that? I didn't marry, but my HS sweetheart has very rich parents. I remember his mom sitting me down and telling me how her husband / my so's dad choked her out after abusing her on their honeymoon. When I asked why she stayed, she looked astonished and said because they'd have to split their assets. They had a 3-story mansion. Even when we dated, the dad lived primarily on the 2nd floor and she lived on the 3rd. They just adjusted to that type of life, and even now, 20 years later, are married. My husband's family is fairly wealthy, not turbo wealthy. They buy everyone a lot of gifts and funded our wedding and stuff, but are weirdly stingy when it comes to helping with life expenses. I would rather they helped pay an outstanding medical bill than receiving excess stuff, but they just don't roll like that. I love my mother-in-law, but she can really go overboard supplying us with things that to me are just clutter. Really not that different from relationships I've had with less wealthy people. He certainly had a leg up on things like education, but as soon as he was an adult he was on his own. His family really values being independent, so he worked from being a poor student to a comfortable professional like me. It's nice knowing that if something disastrous happens we won't end up on the streets. But that's about the only real difference. His family's holiday homes are a nice perk too. Fine, really. In his culture wealth isn't something you wave around, unless you're trashy and rude. Almost all his family members are very down to earth, work for a living, and enjoy the simple things in life. So they're not hard to relate to or get along with. Vacationing at the summer homes, even though they have no electricity or running water. But that's the point, is the only perk marrying into his family than others. That's a great personality trait your so's family have. My husband's family is wealthy. His parents are retired doctors / medical technicians. I did not grow up like that. My dad is a former cop turned purchasing / logistics employee, and my mom stayed home to homeschool us. We were very lower middle class. We always struggled to make ends meet. We did nothing but the essentials: mortgage, food, gas, clothing. Never ate out. I saw my mom cry many times wondering how we could afford the next grocery trip when my dad got laid off a couple times. I'm amazed at everything his family can afford and not have to think about it. I was helping Mill clean last year and I found a receipt for a $1,000 she spent at some bicycle shop. I was floored. A few months ago my brother-in-law got married and she mentioned in passing that she was paying off the entire rehearsal meal, which was multi-course, 50 seats at a fine dining place. Again, floored. How can you be so casual about that? Thousands of dollars just, wow. I was literally growing my own food at one time. Just, wow. But the biggest one was when I graduated college. My husband, then Fian K, kept telling me he wanted to go to Italy. We don't have the money. I said. We just got into the professional field. We are about to move. We are about to get married. What are you thinking? Let's stick to the essentials until all of that passes. Then we can talk about it. I argued. His mom heard about his plans and said, oh, I'll give you some money for it. How about it's a graduation gift from your father and me? She got on her computer and literally transferred a few $1,000s to his bank account, and we were able to purchase tickets and have spending money. The culture difference can be jarring, but they are a really sweet family. They are so refined, so incredibly intelligent and well spoken, and very, very generous, even if somewhat dysfunctional sometimes. Also, the one thing they can't do is cook. I'm great at it because I had to growing up. So I get to make all their meals when I visit, and it makes me feel so proud, lol. There's a silver lining to everything. Edited a few typos / for clarity etc. This is really sweet. Thank you for sharing. We are not married, but as we've been together for about 7 years now, I will still share my 2 cents. The biggest adjustments are still the same as they were back then. At no point had I even thought that kidnapping insurance was a thing. But it is. And his younger sisters had been attempted kidnapped from preschool. The paranoia that he and his family deals with is concerning, and I'm putting it in quotation marks because calling it paranoia makes it sound irrational. But it's nothing but rational. Even outside of criminal contexts, always having to worry if people are trying to exploit or cheat you must be mentally exhausting. I found out, after dating him for a long time, that he had done a full background check on me, which was one of the weirdest realizations I have ever had. It disclosed things about me that I did not even know myself. It's still hard to understand how cost is never part of his decision making in anything that relates to finance. As the great philosopher Jovan Virginie Scott said, money ain't a thing if I got it. That's apparently more true than I could ever imagine. The vacations are pretty damn nice though. It disclosed things about me that I did not even know myself. Whoa. Are you able to give examples? There were 2 specific things that came up. One was that I was investigated by the police as a possible accessory to a crime committed by an ex-BF while we were together. The second one was that I had been the victim of identity theft when I was young. Neither of those were ever brought to my attention. So I have no clue how his guys were able to find out. Not married yet, but his family are super generous. Over Christmas, I don't have a mother or father to spend it with, so they always make me feel welcome and part of the family. They paid Osso's student and car loan, so he has more money each month. They gave each of his siblings $100k to help with mortgages. We never had to save up a deposit when we started working after university. The bad side is, one sibling is always trying to see if anyone has been given more money than him and would demand things from the parents. The other sibling would just take things from the parents because they have so much. It may be silly things, gardening equipment or bottles of wine, but I think it's super disrespectful. A comparison from my parents would be that money is never discussed and is never a reason to argue about. They are generally very happy, and from what I see their disagreements are around the 2 siblings I mentioned. Last thing is that I can't be open with my family, friends and people at work. I can't say that I was given X amount of money for us to buy a house that realistically should be out of our reach. We are moving soon, and people would ask to see the online brochure. I try to hide the price because I'm embarrassed. I know that might seem like a silly problem, but it's always on my mind not to share too much. As others have mentioned, it's nice to know that no matter what happens, there will be someone to help you out. We've had this experience too, but I've found it easier to be honest when we've had help affording things we wouldn't have otherwise. For example, we were also given money to buy a home, and we were honest with friends who asked us how we would be able to afford it. We've taken the approach that generational wealth and privilege is dangerous if not acknowledged. That's not to say I don't think everyone should have access to buying a home etc. But hiding it doesn't help anyone either. We don't volunteer the information unless someone explicitly asks though. Yes, totally agree. I would never volunteer the information. I can't think of any time someone has explicitly asked how we can afford things, more like making comments like oh I wish I could blah blah. so I just nod and change the subject. So is a doctor, so some people assume he is earning a lot more than he is, and the same with my job. I struggled being honest with my sister as she married a guy that she had to help pay his credit card debt, so would become quite sulky about those things. Sounds like you're not fully acknowledging the privilege that comes with the wealth given to you. Can you explain? Also, comments like this are why I don't discuss these things to anyone in real life. My husband's family is very well off, and it can be jarring. Thankfully my DH is very down to earth, and for the most part you wouldn't know unless he told you. I grew up solidly middle class and we share a lot of the same values, though that's a reflection of who he is, not his family's wealth. Our marriage itself isn't any different than any other good relationship I've seen, though we are lucky to have a level of financial security that I wouldn't have dreamt of otherwise. The only way it really impacts our relationship day to day is that my husband will sometimes spend more than I would anticipate on things, like a $50 tip for his $10 lunch because he liked the waiter. It's hard to argue with him because it makes him happy. Family dynamics can be a little more complicated. There is an expectation that everyone contributes to the family. It can be sexist at times. Something I recognize now as I'm getting pressure to be a SAHM rather than returning to a job I enjoy. There are family members that don't share our priorities, like in any extended family. But ultimately that's true of my family too, and is dealt with like anything else. I got low-key adopted by my friend's family. Every time we go out to eat I'll learn about another food item I've been mispronouncing my whole life. My brother-in-law's parents bought them a house for a wedding gift. My husband's family is well off. Not like crazy wealthy, but comfortable. I grew up fairly poor. The biggest financial difference we are dealing with at the moment is the realization that his parents are financially prepared for their retirement, whereas my parents will likely require a lot more support. For me, it's a huge reminder in how inequity is such a hard cycle to break. Fighting over wills and inheritance. Not speaking up when elderly relative is driving when he/shouldn't. etc. because you're worried about the will. Not a problem in my family because nobody has anything of value beyond sentimental value. Also have to worry about those elderly relatives getting taken advantage of by gold diggers. For me it was kind of the other way around, and I can tell you a little story which enhances the experience. I met my husband on here, and when he came to visit me the first time, he was thirsty, so we went to a supermarket nearby. I already told him that I would pay for it just in passing, and when we arrived at the drinks, he was there for like legit 2 minutes and was just staring at the different drinks. Turns out he really wanted a special kind of orange juice, and he was apparently super uncomfortable about it, even though I had told him he could get anything from in here. He is super cute. At least in my experience. I earned every penny through emotional labor. We are NC with my husband's family, but for what little I got of their material possessions, it would have been easier to work minimum wage overnight in a bad convenience store and buy the stuff myself. Crickets. Crickets everywhere. My husband's family are pretty well off. They're super nice and real. Not weird about it at all. Maybe because they inherited later in life and weren't born to privilege. History is littered with men who have power but little money, so they marry a wealthy heiress. Guess who ends up with no money?